I'd never imagined my happiest day would become my most humiliating nightmare. If you'd asked me that morning, as sunlight streamed through my bedroom window and the world felt full of promise, I would have told you I was the luckiest mother alive. My only son, Daniel, was getting married. The boy I'd raised, the boy whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, and whose dreams I'd nurtured, was about to start a new chapter. I felt a pride so deep it almost hurt. I woke up before my alarm, heart fluttering with excitement. The house was quiet, but my mind was alive with memories. Daniel's first steps, his first day of school, the way he used to run into my arms after a long day. I'd always been his safe place, his biggest cheerleader. Today I hoped I would become something new, a mother-in-law, a cherished part of his new family. As I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the soft blue fabric of my dress, I caught a glimpse of myself, older, yes, but still vibrant. I'd chosen the dress carefully, wanting to look elegant, but not overshadow the bride. I pinned on the pearl brooch Daniel had given me for my 50th birthday, a small token of our bond. My hands trembled, not with nerves, but with anticipation. I wanted everything to be perfect. Downstairs, the house was filled with the scent of fresh coffee and the gentle hum of activity. My sister, always the practical one, fussed over last-minute details. My best friend Linda arrived early to help with my hair, her laughter filling the kitchen. I felt surrounded by love, buoyed by the sense that today was not just Daniel's day, but a celebration of all the years we'd shared. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about Daniel's fiancée, Emily. She was beautiful, poised, and intelligent, a woman I'd hoped would become a daughter to me. Our relationship had been polite, if not close. I tried to give her space, to let her and Daniel build their own traditions. I told myself that, in time, we'd find our rhythm. Today, I hoped, would be the start of that. The drive to the venue was a blur of nerves and excitement. The church was already bustling when I arrived, sunlight glinting off stained glass windows. I was greeted by friends and family, their faces alight with joy. Everywhere I looked, there were flowers, white roses, Daniel's favorite. I took a deep breath, letting the beauty of the moment wash over me. I found Daniel in a quiet corner, adjusting his tie. He looked so grown up, so handsome in his suit. But when he saw me, his face softened into the same boyish grin I'd known all his life. "Mom," he said, pulling me into a hug. "Thank you for everything. I wouldn't be here without you." My heart swelled. I wanted to freeze that moment, to hold on to the warmth of his embrace forever. I brushed a stray hair from his forehead, just as I'd done 1,000 times before. "You're going to be so happy, Daniel," I whispered. "I'm so proud of you." He squeezed my hand, and for a moment, it was just the two of us, mother and son, standing on the threshold of something new. The ceremony was beautiful. Emily glided down the aisle, radiant in lace and tulle. Daniel's eyes shone with love as he watched her approach. I felt tears prick my eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of joy and gratitude. I'd raised a good man, and now he was starting his own family. As they exchanged vows, I thought about all the little moments that had led us here. The bedtime stories, the school projects, the late-night talks. I remembered the promises I'd made to myself when Daniel was born, to love him fiercely, to support him unconditionally, to let him go when the time came. Today, I was keeping that last promise, even though it tugged at my heart. After the ceremony, the guests spilled out into the garden, laughter and music filling the air. I was swept up in a whirlwind of hugs and congratulations. Everywhere I turned, people told me how lucky Daniel was to have me as a mother. I smiled, basking in the glow of their words, believing that I had done something right. At the reception, the tables sparkled with crystal and silver. I was seated at the head table, next to Daniel and Emily. I felt honored, included, part of the celebration. The food was delicious, the wine flowed, and the dance floor beckoned. I watched Daniel and Emily share their first dance, their faces alight with happiness. I imagined future holidays, grandchildren, family traditions yet to be made. For a moment, I allowed myself to dream. I pictured Sunday dinners, laughter on the table, Emily and I sharing recipes and stories. I hoped she would come to see me as more than just Daniel's mother, as a friend, a mentor, maybe even a second mother. I wanted to be needed, to be valued, to be part of their lives. As the evening wore on, I felt a gentle ache in my chest. Not sadness, but the bittersweet joy of letting go. I knew things would change, that Daniel's priorities would shift, but I believed, deep down, that our bond was unbreakable. I trusted that there would always be a place for me in his heart. I did notice, at first, the small signs, the way Emily's mother glanced at me, the whispered conversations at the next table. I was too caught up in the magic of the night, too eager to believe that everything was as perfect as it seemed. If only I had known what was coming. If only I had seen the storm gathering on the horizon. But in that moment, I was simply a mother, full of hope, standing in the light of her son's happiness. And as the band played and the laughter grew louder, I held on to that hope, unaware that it was about to be shattered in front of everyone I loved. Have you ever felt invisible at your own family's celebration? I hadn't, at least, not until that night. The warmth of my memories clung to me like a shawl as I moved through the reception. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, a chill began to seep in. It started with the photographs. After the ceremony, the photographer called for family portraits. I stood to the side, waiting for my turn, watching as Daniel and Emily posed with her parents, her siblings, her grandparents. Their laughter rang out, bright and easy, as the photographer snapped picture after picture. I smiled, thinking how lovely they all looked together, how happy Daniel seemed. I waited for someone to call my name, to wave Milbert, but the moments slipped by. The photographer glanced at his list. Tenet, Emily, who shook her head ever so slightly. My heart gave a small, uncertain flutter. Finally, Daniel noticed me lingering at the edge of the group. "Mom, come join us," he called, his voice warm but distracted. I stepped forward, but as I did, Emily's mother slid into place beside Daniel. Her arm looped through his. The photographer snapped another shot. I hovered awkwardly, unsure where to stand, until Daniel reached out and gently pulled me in. The photographer took a single photo, then quickly moved on. It was such a small thing, really, hardly worth mentioning, but it left me feeling oddly out of place, as if I were a guest at someone else's celebration. I tried to brush it off. After all, weddings are chaotic, and everyone is pulled in 100 directions. I told myself not to be sensitive, not to read too much into it. But as the evening wore on, the feeling grew harder to ignore. At dinner, I discovered my seat was not at the head table, as I'd expected, but at a side table near the kitchen doors. I stared at the place card, my name written in looping script, and felt a pang of confusion. I glanced around, searching for Daniel, but he was already deep in conversation with Emily and her family. He took my seat, trying to convince myself it was a simple oversight. The table filled with distant relatives and a few of Emily's friends. They chatted politely, but I felt like an outsider, my presence barely acknowledged. I watched as Emily's mother was ushered to a seat of honor beside the bride and groom, her laughter ringing out above the music. I tried to join the conversation at my table, but my words seemed to fall flat, lost in the din. During the meal, I caught snippets of conversation from the head table. Inside jokes, shared memories, plans for future holidays. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that I was not included in any of them. I was on the outside looking in, a spectator at my own son's wedding. I excused myself and wandered through the reception hall, searching for familiar faces. I found Linda, my best friend, chatting with a group of guests. She greeted me warmly, but as I tried to join the conversation, Emily's aunt turned her back, blocking me out. I stood there awkward and uncertain, before quietly slipping away. The music swelled, and couples filled the dance floor. I watched Daniel and Emily twirl together, their faces alight with joy. I wanted to feel happy for them, to share in their celebration, but a heaviness settled in my chest. I remembered the nights Daniel and I had danced in the living room, laughing as we spun in circles. I remembered the promise I'd made to always be there for him, no matter what. Now, I wondered if there was still a place for me in his new life. As the evening wore on, the slights became harder to ignore. When the cake was served, I was given a smaller slice than the others at my table. When the bouquet was tossed, Emily's friends formed a tight circle, blocking me from joining in. When I tried to speak with Emily, She smiled politely, then turned away to talk to someone else. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being oversensitive, but the feeling of exclusion grew with every passing moment. I watched as Emily's family surrounded her, their affection and pride on full display. I saw the way Daniel looked at her, his eyes shining with love. I wanted to be happy for them, but I couldn't shake the sense that I was being pushed aside. At one point, I found myself standing alone near the bar, watching the celebration unfold around me. I felt invisible, as if I had faded into the wallpaper. I thought of all the years I'd spent raising Daniel, all the sacrifices I'd made, all the love I'd poured into our family. I wondered if any of it mattered now. I tried to remind myself of the warmth of our memories, the bedtime stories, the family vacations, the laughter we'd shared. But those memories felt distant, overshadowed by the coldness of my new reality. I caught Daniel's eye across the room. He smiled at me, a quick, distracted smile. Before turning back to Emily, I wanted to go to him, to tell him how I was feeling, but I didn't want to ruin his day. I told myself to be strong, to be gracious, to let him go. As the night wore on, I felt more and more like a stranger in my own family. The celebration swirled around me, bright and joyful, but I stood at the edge, unseen and unheard. I tried to hold on to hope, to believe that things would get better, that this was just a rocky beginning. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. I wondered if I was losing my place in Daniel's life, if I was destined to become a footnote in his story. I didn't know it then, but these subtle slights were only the beginning. The real humiliation was still to come, waiting for me just around the corner, ready to shatter whatever hope I had left. What she said next made my heart stop, and the entire room went silent. The evening had settled into a comfortable rhythm of music, laughter, and clinking glasses. I tried to lose myself in the swirl of celebration, telling myself that the awkwardness and slights were just the growing pains of a new family. I watched Daniel and Emily move from table to table, greeting guests, their faces glowing with happiness. I wanted to believe that I still belonged, that I was still needed, even if I felt invisible. Then the band quieted, and the MC called for everyone's attention. It was time for the toasts. I felt a flutter of nerves. This was always my favorite part of weddings, the moment when love and gratitude were spoken aloud, when families came together in laughter and tears. I looked forward to hearing Daniel's words, maybe even sharing a few of my own. Emily stood up first, microphone in hand, her white dress shimmering under the lights. She smiled, her eyes sweeping the room, and for a moment I thought she looked at me with warmth. I straightened in my seat, hopeful that this was the moment we would finally connect, that she would welcome me into her heart. She began with a few sweet words about Daniel, how he made her laugh, how he was her best friend. The guests smiled, raising their glasses. She thanked her parents for their support, her friends for their love. Then her tone shifted, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. And of course, she said, pausing for effect, I have to thank my new mother-in-law who's been, well, let's just say, a unique presence in our lives. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. I forced a smile, unsure where this was going. Emily continued, her voice light and teasing. I mean, what would we do without her? Who else would remind us to use coasters, or tell us how to fold towels the right way? Who else would call Daniel 3 times a day to make sure he is eating his vegetables? More laughter. I felt my cheeks flush, but I told myself it was harmless, just a bit of fun. I tried to laugh along, even as my stomach tightened. But really, Emily said, her smile sharpening, I have to admire her dedication. I mean, it takes a special kind of woman to spend her whole life fussing over everyone else, doesn't it? To put everyone's needs before her own, even when no one asked her to. The laughter grew louder, tinged with something meaner. I felt the eyes of 260 guests on me, their amusement turning me inside out. I glanced at Daniel, searching his face for reassurance, but he looked uncomfortable, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth. Emily wasn't finished. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried across the room. Honestly, I don't know how she does it. I mean, I can barely keep up with my own life, let alone everyone else's. Maybe it's a generational thing. Or maybe, she paused, her eyes locking on mine. Maybe it's just what happens when you don't have anything better to do. A hush fell over the room. I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart pounded in my chest, loud and frantic. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to run from the spotlight that had suddenly become a prison. Emily smiled sweetly, as if sad and tea just gutted me in front of everyone I knew. So here's to my new mother-in-law. The most dedicated, persistent, and, well, let's be honest, sometimes a little bit useless old woman I've ever met. The words hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a few nervous laughs, followed by a wave of uncomfortable chuckles. Some people looked away, others stared at me, their faces a mix of pity and embarrassment. I sat frozen, my hands clenched in my lap. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I felt exposed, stripped bare, every insecurity I'd ever had laid out for the world to see. I tried to catch Daniel's eye, desperate for him to say something, to do something, but he just stared at his plate, his jaw tight. The MC tried to recover, making a joke about mothers-in-law, but the damage was done. The room buzzed with whispers, the air thick with discomfort. I felt as if I were underwater, the sounds around me muffled and distant. I replayed Emily's words in my mind, each one a fresh wound. Useless, old woman. The phrase echoed, bouncing off the walls of my heart. I thought of all the years I'd spent caring for Daniel, all the sacrifices I'd made, all the love I'd given. Was this how I was seen now? As a joke, a burden, an afterthought. I wanted to stand up, to defend myself, to tell everyone that I mattered, that I had valued. But the words caught in my throat, strangled by shame and disbelief. He felt small, insignificant, as if I had shrunk to nothing in the space of a single toast. Around me, the celebration continued, but I was no longer part of it. I was a ghost at my own son's wedding, invisible except for the sting of humiliation that burned on my skin. I watched as Emily handed the microphone to Daniel, her smile triumphant. He hesitated, glancing at me, but then forced a laugh and thanked everyone for coming. His words were a blur, lost in the roar of blood in my ears. I looked around the room, searching for a friendly face, someone who might understand, who might reach out. But most people avoided my gaze, their eyes sliding away in discomfort. A few offered sympathetic smiles, but no one came to my side. I felt utterly alone. The rest of the toasts passed in a haze. I barely heard the words, barely tasted the food. I sat stiffly, my hands trembling, my mind racing. I wondered if I was overreacting, if I was being too sensitive. But the pain was real, sharp, and undeniable. I thought of all the times I'd dreamed of this day, all the ways I'd imagined being welcomed into Daniel's new life. I pictured laughter, warmth, acceptance. Instead, I'd been made a punchline, a target, a useless old woman in the eyes of my new family. As the applause faded and the music started up again, I excused myself from the table. I walked slowly, my head held high, refusing to let anyone see me cry. But inside, I was crumbling, the foundation of my world shaken to its core. I slipped into the restroom, locking the door behind me. I stared at my reflection, searching for the woman I used to be. I saw only pain, confusion, and a deep, aching loneliness. I pressed my hands to the cool marble countertop, willing myself not to fall apart. I told myself I would not give Emily the satisfaction of seeing me break. But the tears came anyway, hot and silent, slipping down my cheeks as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I had never felt so humiliated, so betrayed, so utterly alone. And as the sounds of celebration drifted through the door, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. Would you have stayed or walked out right then? I ask myself that question even now, replaying the moment over and over in my mind. The truth is, I didn't know what to do. I was frozen, caught between the urge to run and the desperate hope that someone, anyone, would notice my pain and reach out. Inside the restroom, the world felt muffled and far away. I pressed my back against the door, willing my heart to slow, my breath to steady. The laughter and music from the reception seeped through the walls, a cruel reminder that the celebration continued without me. I dabbed at my eyes with a tissue, careful not to smudge my makeup, determined not to let anyone see the evidence of my humiliation. I stared at my reflection, searching for answers. Who was this woman, standing alone in a bathroom stall at her son's wedding, her heart in pieces? I remembered the girl I used to be, hopeful, full of dreams, certain that love and kindness would always be enough. I remembered the young mother who had cradled Daniel in her arms, promising to protect him from the world. I wondered when I had become so invisible, so easy to mock and dismiss. Voices drifted in from the hallway. Two women, their heels clicking on the tile. I recognized them as friends of Emily's, their laughter sharp and brittle. "Did you hear that?" "Toast," one of them whispered, barely containing her glee. "I can't believe she actually said that out loud." "I know." Poor Daniel's mom. She looked like she was about to cry. But honestly, she kinda brings it on herself, doesn't she? Always hovering, always trying to be the center of attention. Their words stung, each one a fresh cut. I pressed my hand to my mouth, fighting the urge to sob. I wanted to burst out of the stall, to defend myself, to scream that I was only trying to love my son, to be part of his life. But I stayed silent, shrinking into myself, letting their words wash over me like cold rain. When they finally left, I waited a few moments longer, gathering what little strength I had left. I smoothed my dress, fixed my hair, and forced a smile onto my face. I told myself I would not let them see me broken. I would not give Emily the satisfaction. I stepped back into the reception hall, blinking against the bright lights. The room was alive with music and laughter, the dance floor crowded with guests. Everywhere I looked, people were celebrating, lost in their own joy. I felt like a ghost, drifting through a world that no longer saw me. I tried to find Daniel, hoping for a moment of comfort, a sign that he understood what I was feeling. I spotted him near the bar, his arm around Emily's waist. He looked up as I approached, his eyes meeting mine for a brief, flickering moment. I saw the conflict there, the guilt, the confusion, the helplessness. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but Emily tugged at his sleeve, pulling him back into the crowd. I stood there, rooted to the spot, watching as my son was swept away from me. I wanted to call out to him, to remind him of all the years we'd shared, all the love that had brought us to this day. But the words died on my lips. I realized, with a hollow ache, that I was no longer the center of his world. I was barely even a part of it. I wandered through the room, searching for a familiar face, someone who might offer a kind word or a sympathetic smile. I found Linda, my best friend, chatting with a group of guests. She saw me, and her eyes softened, but before she could break away, someone else pulled her into a dance. I was left standing alone, clutching my empty glass, the noise and laughter swirling around me like a storm. I tried to lose myself in the crowd, to blend in, to pretend that nothing was wrong. But everywhere I turned, I caught snippets of conversation, whispers, glances, the occasional stifled laugh. I knew they were talking about me, dissecting Emily's words, speculating about what I had done to deserve such a public shaming. I felt exposed, raw, as if every flaw and failing I'd ever had was on display for the world to see. I wondered if I really was the person Emily had painted me to be. Clingy, overbearing, useless. I questioned every choice I'd made, every moment of love and care I'd given to Daniel. Had I smothered him? Had I failed to let him go? The questions circled in my mind, relentless and cruel. I tried to remind myself of the good times, the laughter and joy we'd shared, but those memories felt distant, unreachable, drowned out by the noise of the present. As the night wore on, I felt myself shrinking, retreating further and further into myself. The room was full, but I had never felt so alone. I watched as Daniel and Emily danced, their faces alight with happiness, their future stretching out before them. I wondered where I fit into that future. If I fit at all, I thought about leaving, about slipping out the door and disappearing into the night. No one would notice. Premeditated myself, no one would care. But something kept me rooted to the spot, a stubborn spark of pride, a refusal to let them drive me away. So I stayed, standing at the edge of the celebration, invisible and alone. I watched as the world moved on without me, the music and laughter swirling around me like a distant echo. And in that moment, I realized that I was truly, utterly alone. I realized I was losing not just my son, but my entire family. Unless I did something. The morning after the wedding, I woke with a heaviness in my chest that felt almost physical. The sunlight streaming through my window seemed cruel, as if the world had no idea what had happened the night before. Primera la, y in bed, replaying every moment of the reception, every word of Emily's toast, every glance and whisper that followed. I wondered if it had all been a bad dream, if I would wake up and find that nothing had changed. But the ache in my heart told me otherwise. I tried to tell myself that things would be different in the light of day. Surely Daniel would call, would apologize, would reassure me that I still mattered. I waited by the phone, jumping at every sound, but the hours slipped by in silence. The house felt emptier than ever, every room echoing with memories of laughter and love that now seemed impossibly distant. By afternoon, I couldn't stand it any longer. I picked up the phone and dialed Daniel's number, my hands trembling. He answered on the third ring, his voice tired and distracted. "Hi, Mom." I hesitated, unsure how to begin. "Daniel." "Hi. I wanted to talk about last night, about what Emily said during our toast." There was a pause, a long silence that stretched between us like a chasm. "Mom, it was just a joke. Emily didn't mean anything by it." I felt my throat tighten. It didn't feel like a joke. It was humiliating. "Daniel, in front of everyone." He sighed, the sound heavy with impatience. "You're overreacting." Emily was nervous. She was just trying to be funny. "Can't you let it go?" The words stung, sharper than I expected. I just want to understand why she would say something like that. I want to know if I've done something to upset her. Another pause. "Mom, you're always so sensitive. You take everything personally. Emily's my wife now. I need you to get along with her." I felt the ground shift beneath me. I want to get along with her, Daniel. But I also want to feel respected. I want to feel like I still matter to you. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I have to go. We're busy on—" "I'll call you later." He hung up before I could say another word. I sat there, staring at the phone, my hands shaking. I felt a wave of anger rise up, mingling with the hurt and confusion. Was I really being oversensitive? Was it too much to ask for a little kindness? A little understanding? I tried to reach out to Emily, hoping for some kind of resolution. I sent her a message, carefully worded, asking if we could talk. She replied hours later, her words clipped and formal. "I'm sorry if you were offended." It was meant as a light-hearted joke. "I hope we can move past this for Daniel's sake." No apology. No acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused. Just a polite dismissal, as if my feelings were an inconvenience she'd rather not deal with. The days that followed were a blur of awkward conversations and cold shoulders. I called my sister, hoping for comfort, but she was hesitant, her voice uncertain. "I'm sure Emily didn't mean anything by it," she said. "Maybe you're reading too much into it. Weddings are stressful. Try not to take it personally." I reached out to other family members, but the responses were much the same. Some tried to change the subject, others offered vague. A few, emboldened by Emily's words, began to treat me differently, less warmly, more dismissively, as if I had become a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. At a family dinner the following weekend, the tension was palpable. Emily and Daniel arrived late, their smiles brittle. Conversation was stilted, every topic carefully chosen to avoid the elephant in the room. When I tried to bring up the wedding, Emily rolled her eyes, and Daniel shot me a warning look. After dinner, as I cleared the dishes, I overheard Emily whispering to Daniel in the hallway. "She's always like this, always making everything about her. I can't deal with it." Daniel's reply was muffled, but I caught enough to know he wasn't defending me. I felt a cold fury settle in my chest. I had spent my life putting my family first, sacrificing my own needs for theirs. I had loved Daniel with every fiber of my being, and now I was being cast aside, dismissed as oversensitive, needy, and irrelevant. The worst part was the way the rest of the family began to shift around me. My niece, who used to visit every Sunday, stopped calling. My brother, who had always been my confidant, grew distant, his messages short and infrequent. Even Linda, my best friend, seemed unsure how to comfort me. Her words, careful and measured. I realized I was being slowly, systematically pushed out, not just by Emily, but by everyone who found it easier to side with her than to stand up for me. It was easier to believe I was the problem than to confront the ugliness of what had happened. The loneliness was suffocating. I spent long nights replaying every conversation, every moment of the wedding, searching for clues, for reasons, for some way to fix what had been broken. I questioned my worth, my place in the family, my very identity. But beneath the pain, something else began to stir, a quiet, simmering resolve. I refused to let Emily's words define me. I refused to let my family erase me. I had spent too many years sacrificing my happiness for others, too many years swallowing my pain to keep the peace. I began to see the situation with new eyes. I saw the cowardice in Daniel's silence, the convenience in my family's indifference. I saw the way Emily wielded her words like weapons, cutting me down to build herself up. And I realized that I had a choice. I could continue to shrink, to disappear, to let them write me out of my own story. Or I could stand up, speak out, and reclaim my place. The anger that had once felt shameful now felt righteous. The loneliness that had once felt crushing now felt clarifying. I saw, for the first time, that I was not powerless. I still had a voice, and I intended to use it. I didn't know exactly what I would do, or how I would do it, but I knew one thing for certain. I would not let them break me. I would not let them take away my dignity, my worth, or my love for myself. The days of passive suffering were over. It was time to fight for myself, to demand the respect I deserved, to remind my family and myself that I was not so easily erased. When was the last time you put yourself first? I asked myself that question one night, staring at the ceiling in the darkness, the silence of my empty house pressing in on me. For years, my life had revolved around Daniel, his needs, his happiness, his future. I had poured every ounce of myself into being the mother he needed, the anchor he could always return to. But now, with every phone call left unanswered, every family gathering where I was treated like an afterthought, I realized I had lost myself somewhere along the way. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening. Daniel and Emily had invited me to dinner, a gesture I hoped meant they were ready to talk, to heal the rift between us. I arrived with a hopeful heart, clutching a homemade pie, Daniel's favorite, the one I used to bake for his birthdays. Emily opened the door, her smile tight and brittle. We sat around the table, the conversation awkward and forced. I tried to bridge the gap, asking about their new apartment, their plans for the future. Emily answered in clipped sentences, her eyes darting to Daniel for approval. He barely looked at me, his attention fixed on his phone. Finally, I gathered my courage. I know things have been tense since the wedding, I said quietly. I just want us to move forward. I want to understand, to make things right. Emily set down her fork with a clatter. Honestly, I think you're making this a much bigger deal than it is. You're always so dramatic, always needing attention. It's exhausting. Daniel didn't defend me. He just saged, as if he were tired of the whole thing. Mom, can't you just let it go? We're trying to start our own life. Maybe you should focus on yours. The words hit me like a slap. I looked at my son, searching for the boy I'd raised, the boy who used to run to me for comfort. But he was gone, replaced by a man who saw me as a burden, an embarrassment. I stood up, my hands trembling. I see, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for dinner. I left the pie on the table, untouched. The drive home was a blur of tears and headlights. I felt hollowed out, emptied of hope. But as I pulled into my driveway, something inside me shifted. I realized I was done begging for scraps of affection, done twisting myself into knots to please people who no longer cared. I was done letting their cruelty define me. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would no longer accept disrespect. I would no longer shrink to fit someone else's comfort. I would choose myself, for the first time in years. The next morning, I dug out my old address book and called Linda. We met for coffee, and I told her everything. The wedding, the toast, the coldness that had crept into my life. She listened without judgment, her eyes kind and understanding. You've given enough, honey, she said, squeezing my hand. It's time to start living for you. I took her words to heart. I began to reconnect with friends I hadn't seen in years. Women who remembered the person I used to be before motherhood consumed me. We went to art galleries, tried new restaurants, laughed until our sides ached. I signed up for a pottery class, something I'd always wanted to do but never found the time for. My hands, so used to cooking and cleaning and comforting, learned to shape clay into something beautiful. I started going for long walks in the park, breathing in the crisp air, letting the rhythm of my footsteps quiet the noise in my mind. I rediscovered the joy of solitude, the peace that comes from being alone without being lonely. I read books for pleasure, not just for distraction. I filled my home with music, with flowers, with light. Slowly, the ache in my chest began to ease. I realized that my worth was not tied to Daniel's approval, or Emily's acceptance, or anyone else's opinion. I was more than a mother, more than a caretaker. I was a woman with dreams and desires of her own. I started saying no to invitations that felt like obligations, to conversations that left me feeling small, to people who drained my energy. I set boundaries, gentle but firm. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. For the first time in years, I felt free. There were moments of doubt, of course. Old habits die hard, and sometimes I caught myself reaching for the phone, wanting to check on Daniel, wanting to fix things. But I reminded myself that I deserved happiness, too. I deserved respect and love and peace. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who had survived heartbreak, who had weathered storms and come out stronger. I saw someone worth fighting for. The years of self-sacrifice had shaped me, but they would not define me. I was ready to write a new story, one where I was the hero, not the victim. And as I stepped out into the world, head held high, I knew I was finally choosing myself. They thought I would stay silent, but I had a surprise of my own. As the weeks passed, the ache of betrayal faded into something sharper, more focused. I had spent so long shrinking myself, apologizing for my existence, that I almost forgot what it felt like to stand tall. But with every pottery class, every walk in the park, every moment spent with friends who saw me for who I truly was, my confidence grew. I realized I didn't have to accept the story others wrote for me. I could write my own. The idea came to me one quiet afternoon as I sat in my sunlit kitchen, shaping clay with steady hands. I thought about all the family gatherings I'd hosted over the years. Birthdays, holidays, Sunday dinners. I remembered the laughter, the warmth, the way my home had always been a place of comfort and connection. I missed that feeling, missed being surrounded by people who mattered to me. But more than anything, I missed being seen. That's when I decided I would host a gathering of my own. Not out of obligation, not to prove anything to anyone, but to reclaim my space, my voice, my dignity. I would invite everyone, my siblings, my nieces and nephews, my friends, and yes, even Daniel and Emily. I wanted them all to see the woman I'd become, the woman I had always been beneath the layers of hurt and disappointment. I started planning with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I made lists, sent invitations, and decorated my home with fresh flowers and candles. I cooked my favorite dishes, the ones that always brought people together. Roast chicken with rosemary, lemon tart, homemade bread still warm from the oven. I poured my heart into every detail, not to impress, but to create an atmosphere of warmth and welcome. As the day approached, I felt a flutter of nerves, but also a deep sense of resolve. I knew what I wanted to say. I wrote and rewrote my speech, searching for the right words to capture my truth. I didn't want to lash out or seek revenge. I wanted to speak with grace and strength, to show my family and myself that I was no longer afraid. The morning of the gathering, I woke early, sunlight streaming through the curtains. I moved through my home with a sense of calm, arranging flowers, setting the table, lighting candles. I played my favorite music, letting the melodies fill the rooms with hope and possibility. I wore a dress that made me feel beautiful, a soft blue that brought out the color in my eyes. I pinned on my pearl brooch, a reminder of the bond I still cherished with Daniel, even if it was strained. Guests began to arrive, filling the house with laughter and conversation. My sister hugged me tightly. My nieces and nephews ran through the halls, their voices bright and joyful. Friends brought bottles of wine and stories to share. For the first time in a long time, my home felt alive. I watched the door, my heart pounding, as Daniel and Emily finally arrived. They stood in the entryway, uncertain, their smiles polite but guarded. I greeted them warmly, refusing to let old wounds dictate the tone of the day. I wanted them to see that I was not broken, not bitter, but whole and strong. As everyone settled in, I moved through the crowd, refilling glasses, sharing stories, laughing at old jokes. I felt a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. I was not invisible here. I was the heart of my home, the center of my own story. When dinner was served, I stood at the head of the table, my hands steady, my voice clear. I looked around at the faces of the people I loved, the people who had shaped my life in ways big and small. I saw curiosity, affection, and, on a few faces, uncertainty. I took a deep breath and began. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. It means more to me than I can say. This home has always been a place of love and laughter, a place where everyone is welcome. I've spent many years putting others first, sometimes at the expense of my own happiness. I did it out of love, out of a desire to see my family thrive. I paused, letting my words settle. I saw Danielle shift in his seat, Emily's eyes narrowing just slightly. But I've learned something important in these past few months. I've learned that love is not about losing yourself. It's not about shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. It's about standing tall, speaking your truth, and demanding respect, not just from others, but from yourself. A hush fell over the table. I felt the weight of every eye on me, but I didn't falter. I was hurt by things that were said and done. I won't pretend otherwise, but I refuse to let that pain define me. I refuse to let anyone make me feel small or unworthy. I am proud of the woman I am, the mother I've been, and the life I've built. I looked directly at Daniel, my voice gentle but firm. I will always love you, Daniel. That will never change. But I need you to see me, not just as your mother, but as a person with dreams, with feelings, with a life of my own. I turned to Emily, meeting her gaze without flinching. And Emily, I hope we can find a way to move forward with kindness and respect. I want to be part of your lives, but I will not accept being treated as less than I am. I finished with a smile, my heart pounding but full. Tonight is about new beginnings, about choosing ourselves, even when it's hard, about remembering that we are worthy of love and respect, no matter what anyone else says. For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, people began to clap. My sister reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Linda beamed at me, pride shining in her eyes. Even Daniel looked moved, his expression softening as he met my gaze. Emily said nothing, her face unreadable, but I saw a flicker of something, maybe respect, maybe surprise. As the evening continued, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had spoken my truth, not with anger, but with dignity. I had reclaimed my place, not just in my family, but in my own life. I realized that the power to define myself had always been mine. I just had to be brave enough to use it. And as laughter and conversation filled my home, I knew that this was only the beginning. Would you have had the courage to speak your truth in front of everyone? I asked myself that question 100 times as I stood at the head of my dining room table. The faces of my family and friends turned toward me. The room hushed in anticipation. My heart pounded in my chest, but my hands were steady. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, rehearsing my words, steeling myself for whatever reaction might come. I knew I could not control how others would respond, but I could control my own voice. I could choose dignity over silence. The evening had unfolded beautifully. My home was filled with the warmth of laughter and the clinking of glasses, the scent of rosemary and lemon drifting from the kitchen. Children darted between adults, their giggles a sweet reminder of simpler times. My sister and Linda had helped me set the table, arranging flowers and candles so that everything glowed with a gentle, welcoming light. For the first time in months, I felt at peace in my own space. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. I could feel it in the way Daniel avoided my eyes, in the stiffness of Emily's smile, in the careful way some relatives skirted around certain topics. I knew that not everyone was here to support me. Some were curious, some skeptical, some, perhaps, even hoping for a bit of drama. I didn't blame them. Families are complicated, and wounds like mine don't heal overnight. As dessert was served, I rose from my seat, the room quieting almost instantly. I looked around at the people who had shaped my life, my siblings, my nieces and nephews, my friends, and, at the far end of the table, Daniel and Emily. I saw love, uncertainty, and a flicker of hope. I took a deep breath and began. Thank you all for coming tonight. It means more to me than I can say. I know that the past few months have been difficult for all of us, and I want to acknowledge that right from the start. I invited you here not just to share a meal, but to share my heart. I paused, letting my words settle. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. I want to talk about something that happened at Daniel and Emily's wedding. Many of you were there. Some of you have heard about it since. I was the subject of a joke that, to me, felt less like humor and more like a wound. Primera wa, is called a useless old woman in front of everyone I love. In that moment, I felt exposed, humiliated, and deeply alone. A few people shifted in their seats, uncomfortable. I saw my sister's eyes filled with tears, Linda's hand pressed to her mouth. Daniel looked down at his plate, his jaw clenched. Emily's expression was unreadable. I want to be clear. I'm not telling this story to shame anyone, or to seek revenge. I am telling it because I believe in the power of truth. I believe that families are built not just on love, but on respect and kindness. And I believe that silence, in the face of cruelty, only allows it to grow. I looked directly at Daniel, my voice gentle but unwavering. Daniel, I have loved you every day of your life. I have tried to be the best mother I could be, even when I made mistakes. I have sacrificed. I have worried. I have celebrated every joy and mourned every sorrow with you. I know that you are building a new life now, and I am proud of the man you have become. But I need you to understand that I am still here. I am still your mother. I am still a person who deserves respect. I turned to Emily, meeting her gaze. Emily, I welcomed you into our family with an open heart. I hoped we could build a relationship based on mutual respect and kindness. I know that weddings are stressful, and that sometimes words come out wrong. But I want you to know how much your words hurt me. I want you to know that I am not useless. I am not old in the ways that matter. I am strong. I am loving. And I am worthy of dignity. A hush fell over the room. I saw tears in the eyes of several relatives, even a few of Emily's friends. My voice grew stronger as I continued. I have spent most of my life putting others first. I have cooked meals, wiped tears, celebrated birthdays, and held hands through heartbreak. I have been the one to remember anniversaries, to send cards to show up when no one else would. I did these things not because I had nothing better to do, but because I loved you all, because I believed that family was worth every sacrifice. I paused, letting the weight of my words fill the room. But I have learned something important in these past months. I have learned that love without respect is not enough. I have learned that it is not selfish to set boundaries, to demand kindness, to refuse to be the butt of someone else's joke. I have learned that I am allowed to take up space, to have dreams, to be more than just a supporting character in someone else's story. I looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each person in turn. I am not perfect. I have made mistakes, and I am willing to own them. But I will not apologize for loving my family, for wanting to be included, for wanting to matter. I will not apologize for being who I am. A few people began to clap softly, the sound growing as others joined in. My sister wiped her eyes, her voice trembling as she said, "You're not alone. We love you." Linda reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're the strongest woman I know." Even some of Emily's relatives nodded, their faces softening with understanding. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but I wasn't finished. I wanted to leave everyone with something to think about, something to carry forward. I hope that tonight we can start a new chapter. I hope that we can choose kindness over cruelty, respect over ridicule. I hope that we can remember that every person at this table has a story, a heart, a history that deserves to be honored. I hope that we can be the kind of family that lifts each other up, even when it's hard. I turned to Daniel one last time. I love you, Daniel. I always will, but I need you to see me, not just as your mother, but as a woman who has lived, who has loved, who still has so much to give. I looked at Emily, my voice soft but firm. I hope we can find a way to move forward, to build something real. But that can only happen if we treat each other with respect. I ended with a smile, my heart full. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for reminding me that I am not alone. The applause was louder this time, genuine and sustained. People stood to hug me, to offer words of support and encouragement. My nieces and nephews crowded around, telling me how much they loved my stories, my cooking, my laughter. Even a few of Emily's friends approached me, their eyes shining with tears. Daniel finally stood, his face pale but determined. He walked around the table and pulled me into a tight embrace. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I should have stood up for you. I see you. I love you." Emily hung back, her expression conflicted. For a moment, I thought she might leave without saying a word. But then she approached, her voice quiet. "I didn't realize how much I hurt you. I'm sorry. I hope we can start over." I nodded, accepting her words. I knew that forgiveness would take time, that trust would have to be rebuilt. But for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere shifted. The tension that had hung over us melted away, replaced by laughter, by stories, by the easy comfort of family. I watched as Daniel and Emily talked with my friends, as my sister and Linda danced in the living room, as children played at our feet. I felt a sense of belonging, a sense of peace. I realized that my dignity had never truly been lost. It had only been waiting for me to claim it. And as I looked around at the people I loved, I knew that I had done something brave. I had spoken my truth, not with anger, but with love. I had turned pain into power, humiliation into hope. Would you have had the courage to do the same? I hope, if you ever find yourself standing at the edge of your own story, you remember that your voice matters, that you are worthy of respect, that you are never, ever alone. I never expected what my son would say next. The applause from my speech still echoed in the corners of my home as the evening wore on, but beneath the warmth and support, a new tension simmered. The words I'd spoken could not be unsaid, and the truth I'd laid bare demanded a response. I could see it in the way people glanced at Emily, in the way Daniel's jaw tightened as he held me close. The family, once content to ignore the rift, now had to face it head-on. After dessert, as guests mingled and laughter returned to the rooms, I noticed small clusters forming. My sister and Linda in the kitchen, Daniel and Emily in the hallway, a few cousins whispering by the window. I knew the conversations had shifted. The easy avoidance was gone. Now, there were questions, opinions, and, for the first time, accountability. It didn't take long for the first confrontation to find me. Emily's mother approached, her face pinched with discomfort. "I hope you know Emily never meant to hurt you," she said, her voice low. "She's young, and sometimes she doesn't think before she speaks." I met her gaze, steady and calm. I understand that people make mistakes, but words have power. I needed to speak my truth, for myself and for everyone who's ever felt small in their own family. She nodded, a flicker of respect in her eyes. "You're right. I'll talk to her." As she walked away, I felt a strange sense of relief. I had always dreaded confrontation, but now I saw it as a necessary step toward healing. I was no longer willing to smooth things over at my own expense. Later, I found Daniel standing alone on the back porch, staring out into the night. I joined him, the cool air bracing against my skin. For a moment, we stood in silence, the weight of everything unsaid pressing between us. He spoke first, his voice raw. "Mom, I'm sorry. I should have stopped her. I should have defended you. I didn't know how." I looked at him, my heart aching with love and disappointment. "You're my son, Daniel. I don't expect you to be perfect, but I do expect you to stand up for what's right. I need to know that you see me, that you respect me, not just as your mother, but as a person." He nodded, tears shining in his eyes. "I do. I promise. I do." I let Emily's words go too far because I was afraid of making things worse. But I see now that silence is just as harmful. I want to do better. I want us to be a real family. I hugged him, feeling the old bond between us begin to mend. That's all I've ever wanted. Inside, Emily was surrounded by a few of her friends, their voices hushed. When she saw me, she hesitated, then crossed the room. Her posture was stiff, but her eyes were softer than I'd ever seen them. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I was wrong. I thought I was being funny, but I see now that I was cruel. I'm sorry for what I said, and for how I treated you afterward." I studied her face, searching for sincerity. I saw it there, fragile but real. "Thank you, Emily. I accept your apology, but I need you to understand, respect isn't optional. If we're going to have a relationship, it has to be built on kindness." She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want that too. I want to start over, if you'll let me." The conversations that followed were not easy. Some family members struggled to accept the new boundaries I set. My brother, always the peacemaker, tried to downplay the incident, urging me to let bygones be bygones. Primera stood firm, explaining that forgiveness was possible, but only if there was real change. Others surprised me with their support. My niece hugged me tightly, whispering, "I'm proud of you, Auntie. You taught me it's okay to stand up for myself." Linda, ever my champion, raised a glass in my honor, declaring, "Here's two women who refuse to be silenced." The atmosphere in my home shifted. There was tension, yes, but also hope. The sense that something old and toxic had been named and released. I saw Daniel and Emily talking quietly in the corner, their heads close together. I saw my sister wiping away tears, her smile tremulous but genuine. As the night drew to a close, Daniel found me again. "I want you to know Emmy, on your side, Mom. I love Emily, but I won't let anyone treat you that way again. I promise." I squeezed his hand, gratitude and relief flooding through me. "Thank you, Daniel." That's all I needed to hear. Emily approached, her hand slipping into Daniel's. "We'd like to have you over for dinner next week. Just us. No speeches, no drama. I want to get to know you better." I smiled, hope blooming in my chest. I'd like that. As the last guests left and the house grew quiet, I sat alone for a moment, letting the events of the evening wash over me. I'd faced my fears, spoken my truth, and demanded respect. I had weathered the storm and found, on the other side, the beginnings of something new. I knew there would be more difficult conversations ahead, more moments of doubt and discomfort, but I also knew that I was no longer alone. I had reclaimed my voice, my dignity, and my place in the family, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. If you've ever been disrespected by those you love, know that you are not alone. Share your story below. In the weeks that followed my gathering, the air around me felt different, lighter, clearer, as if a storm had finally passed and left the world washed clean. I moved through my days with a new sense of purpose, no longer weighed down by the shame and confusion that had haunted me since the wedding. I had spoken my truth, and in doing so, I had reclaimed something precious, myself. Some relationships began to heal, slowly and tentatively. Daniel called more often, sometimes just to check in, sometimes to share a funny story from work, or ask for a recipe. Our conversations were awkward at first, but gradually, the old warmth returned. He apologized again, not just for what happened at the wedding, but for all the times he failed to see me as a person with feelings and needs of my own. I forgave him, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I could see he was trying, and that mattered more than any perfect words. Emily, too, made an effort. She invited me to dinner, just as she'd promised. And though our first few evenings together were careful and polite, there was a sincerity in her questions, a willingness to listen that hadn't been there before. We talked about our childhoods, our dreams, even our fears. I realized that, beneath her bravado, she was just as uncertain as I had been, eager to belong, afraid of not being enough. We weren't friends yet, but we were no longer strangers. That was enough for now. Not every relationship survived the shift. My brother, uncomfortable with the new boundaries I set, drifted away. Some cousins stopped calling, preferring the old, unspoken rules where silence was safer than honesty. I mourned those losses, but I didn't chase after them. I understood now that not everyone is meant to stay, and that letting go can be an act of love, for them and for myself. What surprised me most was the support I received from unexpected places. My niece sent me a letter, thanking me for showing her what it meant to stand up for yourself. Linda organized a girls' night, raising a toast to new beginnings and unbreakable women. Even a few of Emily's friends reached out, sharing their own stories of feeling small and unseen. I realized that my pain, once so isolating, had become a bridge to others who needed to know they weren't alone. I filled my days with things that brought me joy. I kept going to pottery class, my hands growing more confident with each new piece. I hosted dinners for friends, filling my home with laughter and music. I took long walks, savoring the quiet strength that came from moving forward, step by step. Looking back, I saw the contrast between who I had been and who I was becoming. The woman who had once sat frozen in shame at her son's wedding was gone. In her place stood someone who knew her worth, who demanded respect, who refused to be defined by anyone else's cruelty. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer afraid. I learned that respect is not something you beg for or earn by shrinking yourself. It is something you claim, day by day, and the way you speak, the boundaries you set, the love you give yourself. I learned that it's never too late to rewrite your story, to choose yourself, to demand better. If you're reading this and you've ever felt small, overlooked, or disrespected by those you love, I want you to know you are not alone. Your pain is real, but so is your power. You have the right to speak your truth, to set boundaries, to walk away from those who cannot honor your worth. You have the right to be seen, to be heard, to be loved for exactly who you are. My story is not unique. It is the story of every woman who has ever been made to feel less than, who has ever been told to sit down and stay quiet. But it is also the story of every woman who has found the courage to stand up, to speak out, to reclaim her place in the world. As I look to the future, I do so with hope. I know there will be challenges, moments of doubt, days when old wounds ache, but I also know that I am strong enough to face them. I am proud of the woman I have become, and I am grateful for the journey that brought me here, even the painful parts. So if you find yourself at a crossroads, wondering if you have the strength to demand more, let my story be your answer. You do. You always have. And as I close this chapter, I do so with my head held high, my heart open, and my spirit unbroken. Thank you for listening. Thank you for seeing me, and thank you for reminding me and yourself that we are all worthy of respect.